Good evening again, everyone. It's good to be at the Best Way program. Now, this is not the Good Way program, nor the Better Way program. It is the Best Way program. I remember my little tagline that I share with you, and it goes like this. Remember it: good, better, best. Never let it rest until your good is better and your better. And so with that, we are gonna go into some announcement. Let me just pull up my announcement. This thing is okay. So we gotta remember to log our weights on Mondays and to do our daily contacting through texting and our weekly accountability calls. And one other announcement is that next week our times are gonna be shifted. We are not gonna be starting at 7 as we do tonight. We will be starting at 30. So half an hour later, we'll be starting next week. So want to look out for that. Those changes and next week. So next week we're gonna start at 7:30, and I just want to welcome each and everyone here tonight. And tonight our subject matter we are gonna look at carbs tonight. Tonight we're gonna look at carbs. Last week we had a good presentation. One thing I remember about last week is that nuts is very good for you. That's one of my takeaway. And so Dr. Nita Hillman will be doing our first lecture tonight. And if someone could spotlight Dr. Nita Hillman as she comes and share our lecture with us tonight.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm so glad to see you here. Why don't we dive into our lecture? We've got a lot to share tonight, so I'm just going to share my screen here. And thank you, Peter, for that introduction. Let me just make this a little smaller for you guys. All right, everyone can see. Can you just give me a thumbs up if you can see the screen well? Yeah, you got it. Great, awesome. All right, well, we're going to be talking about carbohydrates and sugars today, things that I know that many of you are really excited to find out about. You've had a lot of questions about these, so why don't we step in? I want to just begin with a quick quote. I wish I could cover everything that was in the original presentations. We can't, so I'm just going to pick out a few things. And this quote is one thing that I really wanted to bring out. This was a study that was done over a period of time, 4,000 people from US, UK, Japan, and China, ages 40 to 59, which encompasses many people who are in this group. But one of the things, since we're talking about weight loss, right, there's great information about diabetes, there's great information about, heart disease and other things like that, but I know you're here for weight loss. And so I want you to be rest assured that the things that we're asking you to do are actually going to help you with losing weight. This was presented by Dr. Linda Van Horn in talking about prevention of heart disease and different diets and nutrition. And she said this: without exception, again, without exception, a high complex carbohydrate diet, she didn't say low carbohydrates, but high carbohydrate diet, specifically complex carbohydrates, and a high vegetable protein diet is associated with lower body mass. Now, what does that mean, lower body mass? Less weight, okay? High protein diets were typically associated with higher body weight. And then she went on to further find out, well, what does she mean by the type of complex carbohydrates? It was whole grains, fruits, vegetables, not donuts, right? Oh, I wish it was donuts, but it's not donuts. And not polished rice or refined rice. What she was talking about was even specifically legumes. These are your beans, peas, and lentils, your vegetables that offer fiber as well as protein. She also mentioned later on in her lecture, as she was presenting, fruits too. And she said, again, we're not talking about refined carbohydrates, okay? So important to keep those things in mind. Well, what does this mean, high complex carbohydrate? Well, let's look a little bit at what carbohydrates look like. When you look at the name carbohydrate, okay, it has in itself tells us what they are composed of: carb, so carbon molecules, oxygen, and hydrogen molecules, okay? Last week we looked at fats. Next week we'll look at proteins. This is specifically just looking at carbohydrates, and we call carbohydrates saccharides, okay? If there's just a simple carbohydrate molecule such as glucose, fructose, or galactose right here, then those are considered monosaccharides, okay? Every carbohydrate that we consume has to be broken down into one of these three molecules to be absorbed into the bloodstream. Okay, it eventually has to be converted to this, and then we'll talk a little bit in a second about what those have to further be broken down into. But disaccharides that we know very commonly are those such as sucrose. Okay, where have you heard sucrose before? All right, if you don't recognize sucrose, if you recognize table sugar, right, the stuff that we put into our baked goods and into our drinks or whatever, that's what sucrose is. It's a disaccharide, a double sugar. All right. That's whenever we talk about later today about added sugar, we're mainly talking about things that are disaccharides, and then there are some other components also, and some that we'll talk about, but mainly we're talking about, again, sugar, okay? So these are not complex. Do these look very complex to you? I mean, they may with the molecules, but they don't look very complex. Look at that compared to this, polysaccharides, okay? Whoa, these molecules look hugely different than the other ones, right? When we're looking at polysaccharides, polysaccharides are 10 or more. Now, many of these are very much more than 10 of these smaller monosaccharides put together, but especially look at a couple of them that we're going to look at in some of the foods that we're going to talk about today. There are starches. Your starches are very complex. Okay, these are digestible carbohydrates, polysaccharides. So digestible, complex carbohydrate starches. Okay, then we have glycogen. We're going to talk about that. That's another one we're going to talk about. One of the ways our body stores carbohydrates, also a polysaccharide, also complex. And then we look at fiber. Many of you have heard of fiber, complex carbohydrates, and you think fiber immediately jumps into your mind. Well, cellulose is a type of dietary fiber, and it's non-digestible. So while you've got complex carbohydrates that are digestible, like the starches, you have non-digestible complex carbohydrates. And we'll see why this is important in just a second, okay? What I want you to actually look at is this slide. If we take, when we're consuming a bunch of glucose, excess amounts of glucose in the body. So say we eat our carbohydrates like we should, or complex carbohydrates, but maybe we eat a little bit more than what we should. That glucose has to go somewhere. Everything's broken down. Right? We've got amylase in our body that will break down those complex carbohydrates into double sugars, the ones that we saw like sucrose and lactose. It'll break those down to the double sugars, and our small intestine breaks them down further into the simple sugars that we then absorb into our bloodstream. Now, even fructose and galactose have to be converted to glucose to be used by our body, okay? So eventually those are all going to get converted to glucose. As they're converted to glucose, then what happens is that the pancreas is stimulated and says, oh, we need to use it, pushes out some insulin. We take in that glucose through different receptors to so many cells in our body, our brain, our muscle, our fat cells, our liver. It produces all of this. Now, one of the things is when we get the energy that we need, all of these cells in our body will take that glucose, make it into energy, and we get the amount of energy that we need. What are we going to do with the extra? Because some of us are consuming a little bit more glucose than what we should, right? Don't worry, I wasn't looking in your homes today. I don't know what that was, whether it was the cake or the pie or whatever it may have been, but some of us are taking in a little bit more sugar than we should. And if we do that, what does our body do with that? I don't know if any of you have ever heard this. There was a thing going back and forth many years ago. Does excess sugar really get converted to fat? No, it doesn't. Yes, it does. No, it doesn't. Well, let me tell you what happens to it. In that excess, that glucose is then converted to glycogen to be stored in our muscles and our liver. But there's only so much that we can store. Then what do we do with the excess? Because many of us are consuming even above the amount that we need. Well, we're going to take that glucose and we're going to end up in the liver converting it to fatty acids. And then those fatty acids have to go somewhere. Where are they going to go? Yep, you guessed it right. They're going to go into our fat cells, okay? They go into our fat cells. We've got fat cells, and I'm going to just do a little demonstration for you. We've got fat cells that are around our organs, okay? Down here around our organs. Those fat cells are more, when we increase the fat in those areas, it's more dangerous than the fat cells down here, hanging around here, right? So, but what happens with this excess glucose is it's going to get deposited somewhere, whether it's in our extremities, in our arms, in our legs, or whether it's around our organs, it's going to get stored eventually as fat. Now, when that excess, when we increase the excess amount that is stored in all of that fatty tissue, it also gets stored in the liver, and then it increases what we call insulin resistance, especially when it's at fat around the center. And then we start to develop diseases like diabetes, diseases like metabolic syndrome, diseases like such as heart disease. We even develop dementia as a result of this increased insulin resistance. Okay, so understand that taking in too much of this glucose is going to cause problems in our body, and again, more importantly, it will cause weight gain. Well, how do we make sure that we don't consume too much of this? Remember how I talked about before that certain types of the carbohydrates that we consume are not digested. When in that lecture, Dr. Van Horn was talking about the types of carbohydrates that we consume. She said complex carbohydrates. Refined carbohydrates are just this inside part, for example, in whole grains. Those are the ones that we refine more. We don't typically refine beans as much, but things like the whole grains are what she calls refined carbohydrates. That's the inside part. Now, how much of the cellulose, the fibers, are in this part right here? It's actually very, very small percentage, very small percentage of the fibers area. The fibers are actually found right here in the outside part, the part we take out when we refine those carbohydrates, okay? And those, remember, the more that we have of those in 1 cup of a whole grain versus 1 cup of a refined carbohydrate, we're going to get more in the refined carbohydrate. We're going to get more and more of the digestible carbohydrates that will go into glucose versus the complex carbohydrate, where we take 1 cup of that. We're going to have some of that be non-digestible, not converting to glucose, and used for other good things in our body. We're not going to go into fiber now. We've got another lecture, and we've got another lecture on whole grains, but I just wanted to help you kind of understand and get that picture of why complex carbohydrates are more important than the amount of calories that we take in. As we're looking at another picture of what we talked about in that fat production, remember, if we're just eating simple sugars, we're going to cause our blood sugars to rise high. We're going to get the energy that required, but what's got to happen, right? After we increase the energy requirement, as we are taking in more and more of that sugar, we're going to eventually increase the amount of fat production that we have. Now, compare this to, interestingly, another idea, and that is pasta. Pasta, interestingly, white or wheat, that way that pasta is formed, it actually decreases the comparative amount of fat production is less as compared to just straight sugar, some of our added sugar foods that we eat. That's pretty interesting, right? Well, let's go a little bit further and look at our more complex carbohydrates. Because the glucose is absorbed at much slower, lower rates because of that fiber component that is in it, and then the proteins also that are in there, you're going to watch that the fat production is less. Now, many of you will say, well, that's great. So I'll eat as much brown rice as I want, and I'll eat as much pasta as I want. This is wonderful, right? Well, here's the thing. We still have to eat it in smaller quantities. People who eat complex carbohydrates tend to eat less quantity than those who eat the refined carbohydrates. So if you take that complex carbohydrate and you eat excess amounts of it, you're going to start producing that fat, just as we did, not as much, but as we did with the sugar. So again, not only do we want to eat the complex carbohydrates, we want to also make sure that the quantity we eat of it will be less. And if you're eating complex, you're generally going to tend to eat a little bit less of it. The other things to keep in mind is that all these carbohydrates, remember, all of these carbohydrates, whether they're complex or not, are going to be converted to sugar eventually, right? And again, the more fiber that is in there, the less of these calories that actually get turned into sugar. And again, also the less refined it is, the more that will happen also, okay? The more simple the sugar, such as straight sugars, sugar sweetened beverages, things like that, that sugar is going to rush into the bloodstream, the insulin will increase, we're going to uptake that, and then we're going to create more of the other products that we talk about, especially the fat. Okay, again, comparing sugar, pasta, brown rice. The other important thing to notice is how slowly that blood sugar rises and how easily and flat it goes. Many people have asked the question on the Facebook page or in different, asked me privately, well, I'm a diabetic. How do I make sure that my blood sugars don't just shoot up and down? Well, again, the more complex that carbohydrate, you're not going to have those jumping blood sugars up and down, up and down, up and down, to where you then end up feeling very fatigued and tired and unable to eat. Now, added sugar intake. added sugar intake is a really significant source of calories here in the US. Now, can you imagine if I told you you are, let's just say you're a person greater than the age of 19, most of us here are. If you are, I think all of us here are, if I told you that you were taking 25 or 18 to 25 teaspoons of sugar a day, how many of you would believe that, right? Because we're not actually scooping those teaspoons of sugar in. But what's happening is that we are taking it in the form of the things that we're eating. And what are the biggest sources of added sugar here in the US? The biggest sources of sugar here in the US are actually soft drinks. How many of you, you don't have to, I just want you to think in your mind, how many of you are trying to lose weight, but you are still consuming soft drinks, okay? These are your Coca-Colas, your Sprites, your Dr. Peppers, okay? But also sugar and candy are grain desserts. Whenever we talk about grain desserts, we're talking about cakes, cookies, pies, you know. Oh man, if we were doing this program over Thanksgiving and Christmas, you know, hands would be raising all over the place as to the amount of added sugar many of us are consuming without realizing it. If we had to eat that sugar straight, most of us would not recognize it. But because we're consuming it in variations and forms that we don't recognize, then we end up consuming it without recognizing it and consuming excess amounts that we don't recognize. Now, in looking at these grains, we're not talking about the type of toast and waffles that many of us are consuming. We're talking about toast and waffles that are made because they actually have added sugar with them, okay? Or the way that they're consumed. Remember your risk of diabetes. Many of you have seen this data before. You double the risk of diabetes when you use sugar sweetened cola drinks, okay? The other thing that I wanted to actually mention really quickly, when there was what do you call it? People will tell me, okay, Dr. Hillman, I'm not consuming a regular soft drink. I'm actually consuming a diet drink, okay? Here is something that you have to keep in mind. There was a participants of a San Antonio heart study that found that those who drank more than 21 diet drinks per week, and understand many people are doing that. You're talking about 8-ounce drinks, okay? And many people are consuming much more than that because the sizes of their drinks are much more than just 8 ounces. They were twice as likely to become overweight or obese as people who didn't drink diet soda, okay? Again, I didn't say sugar soda, right? I said diet soda. Multi-ethnic study of atherosclerosis, the daily consumption of diet drinks was associated with a 36% greater risk of metabolic syndrome and a 67% increase in the type 2 diabetes. And that came because many of the diet artificial sweeteners that we use in the drinks were actually up to hundreds of times sweeter to our taste buds than the regular sugar in many of the drinks. That we would otherwise be consuming with sugar in it. So don't think that just because you don't consume the sugar that you're out of the ballpark. Again, juices. How many times growing up did you guys have parties, you know, as little kids with all these sugar sweetened beverages? Not the best thing to give your kids, grandkids as they're coming over. You're going to increase their risk of developing diabetes even at younger ages. And this is why it's such a big push by the American Pediatric Association to be able to decrease the amount of sugar sweetened beverages that our kids are drinking. As we get older, again, the more added sugar we get, we're going to again go from those who have 7.4% of their calories coming from added sugar versus those that are getting 25% of their calories, which is very easy to do. You can, again, more than double the risk of heart disease, okay? Imagine this, if I told you 180,000 people this year are going to have premature deaths this year just from their sugary drinks, okay? 133,000 premature deaths from diabetes. Now understand that if we had, what they haven't put into effect are diseases like COVID, right? The increased risk of death that comes from many of these risk factors associated with the weight gain that comes from the increased added amount of sugar that we take into our body. How much? Many people say, well, I want some sugar. How much can I take? The recommended amount is less than 10% of your calories coming, is ideally what we would say is at less than 10%. And then the American Heart Association says for women, that's 6 teaspoons of sugar. Again, that's not the teaspoons that you put in. They're talking about the total amount. So 25 grams of sugar a day from anything that you're consuming. You really can go to actually having no added sugar if you keep your mind on it and use some of the recipes that we're going to give you. I would encourage you to aim for 0 added sugar, but if you do have some and you're working slowly towards that, then no more than 6 teaspoons and then 9 teaspoons for men, okay? Glycemic index is something, we've got just a few more seconds to look through this, and Glycemic index, the lower the glycemic index, it means that the body does not rapidly convert it to sugar, as rapidly converted to sugar. Let's just look at things in general, okay? Again, remember, pasta is on the lower end. 55 is that number I want you to look at. Low glycemic index is 55 or lower. Pasta is actually not so al dente pasta, that's what they mean by 5 minutes versus 10 minutes boiled, right? Pasta is not as high of a glycemic index as many people realize that it is, that many people think that it is. Now look at the particle size also. If you take your potato and you just have a baked potato versus mashing it or instant mashed potatoes, okay, it changes the glycemic index. Sweet potatoes lower than baked potatoes, than your regular baked white potatoes. Yams, and by the way, yams, so the orange sweet potatoes, that's what they call the yams. The sweet potatoes are the white sweet potatoes, okay? Looking at your fruits, many people say, oh, fruits are bad, they're so high in sugar. They're not. They're lower in glycemic index among those low glycemic index foods. So, except to the exception of watermelon, of course, but that otherwise, in general, you're talking about fruits are on your lower glycemic index of foods. And then your vegetables and your legumes, these are low glycemic index foods. These are the things that you want to eat when it comes to the type of carbohydrates, okay? Now, glycemic index of many of our baked goods out there, the typical ones you're going to pull off the shelf: donuts, cupcakes, muffins, pancakes, and waffles. Again, we're not talking about the type that we make that are from complex carbohydrates that we're going to recommend to you. These are the ones that you're going to pull off the shelf. And I remember making pancakes, I think it was Bisquick, or those little boxes of Bisquick that we used to get growing up, and making those, again, very high in the glycemic index. Why does all of this matter to you? Lower glycemic index help you lose weight and control weight. Lower glycemic index diets will improve your body's sensitivity to insulin, and it will keep you from having sugars running around wreaking havoc in your body. It's going to improve your diabetes control, your risk of heart disease. It's going to reduce your blood sugar or blood cholesterol levels. It will reduce hunger and help you keep you fuller, okay? Low glycemic index is also going to prolong your endurance. When you have that fiber, your blood sugar is released slower in your body, and you're able to increase your endurance in activities more so than you otherwise would. I'm just going to give you, in the last 15 seconds here, I'm going to give you just a couple of ideas of what we mean by complex carbohydrates, okay? Grains or pseudograins. Some people say, oh, this is bad and that's bad. Look, all of your grains, whether you're talking about grains or pseudograins, things like whole grain wheat, teff, wild rice, brown rice, quinoa, oats. Why do they call them pseudograins? They're not grasses, but they contain those same outer and inner portions that we talked about, and same vitamins and B vitamins that are in the whole grain. So whether you're using quinoa or whether you're using oats, you're still going to gain those benefits, okay? I'll post many of these pictures on the Facebook page also later. Healthy complex carbohydrates, your legumes, your beans, peas, and your lentils. Healthy complex carbohydrates, again, your fruits and your vegetables, eating that rainbow of colors that will also help improve the type and help you actually lose weight. Healthy complex carbohydrates, nuts and seeds. The other last couple of tips I'd like to encourage you, if you blend your carbohydrates, you end up blending the food, understand your satiety, your ability to keep from eating sooner is actually going to go down. You're more likely to snack and eat calories in between meals. If the other thing that the International Journal of a study published in the International Journal of Obesity found was that if you drank liquid versus solid meals of the same composition, so if you drank your food rather than eating your food, you're actually more likely to consume 12% more calories throughout the day than if you didn't. So again, my encouragement to you is eat your food, don't drink your food, especially if you're struggling with weight. And then preparing your carbohydrates. You can take a healthy carbohydrate and prepare it poorly, right? Take that baked potato, that sweet potato, and put broccoli, seasoned well, broccoli and beans and salsa on it, and do well, versus throwing high fat on top of the carbohydrates, and put the cheese and the sour cream and the bacon and a little bit of broccoli in there and think that you're doing good. So remember, how you prepare the carbohydrate is just as important. In the South, we actually grew up with where you couldn't go to a restaurant without finding pork or lard and beans. So just make sure you're eating healthy when you're doing that. What about low carbohydrate diets? Dr. Adams talked about that last week. One thing I want you to keep in mind, something that I've been treating a lot in the last little bit, or talking to patients about in the last little bit, is that we're getting a lot of patients with insomnia. One of the reasons for this is because people who are on low carb diets, one of the reasons for this is carbohydrates are required to be able to uptake tryptophan into your body. Tryptophan is the precursor to serotonin, and serotonin, the precursor to melatonin in the body, to be able to help you sleep, fight cancer, and then that serotonin for depression and anxiety. If you're finding you have been used to doing low carbohydrate diets and you're having increased anxiety and depression and sleeplessness, it could be because you're not taking in an adequate amount of carbohydrates, and just making sure again that it's not just amount, but the type of carbohydrates that you take in. Irrespective, here's the thing that you've got to keep in mind. Just because complex carbohydrates are good, you still need to eat fewer calories, okay? Fewer calories equals less weight. Whenever you look at the studies, you want to make sure that you understand that you want to decrease the less the calories that you have, but don't decrease your calories. There are some people that are starving themselves in the process, losing fat, muscle, and bone. We just want you to lose fat, okay? So decrease your calories. Some eat a little bit less. One of the ways to do that is eating the complex carbohydrates, okay? So eat less, and then yeah, we will see you next week as we talk about proteins, all right? Thank you, guys.
Dr. Hillman, just a couple questions briefly here. If you don't leave your slides up
Oh,
for a
sorry,
moment, do you mind?
sorry, yes.
This is a lecture that was exceptional. I still remember the first time I gave this lecture 4 years ago. It put together two concepts for me that I'd never figured out how they went together. Could you back up to the slides that had the three different graphs of showing
Yeah.
the relationship between weight gain and glycemic index? It was back,
Yeah.
yeah, right there.
Yes, yes.
This graph helped me understand for the first time, and I want to make sure all of our participants understand this. Glycemic index is that spike in blood sugar. Is that correct?
Yes, yes.
It's the sugar going up very rapidly, and that's if you just eat straight sugar, that's the red curve there. It just goes up very quickly. And then some of you know what I'm talking about. If you eat a sugary meal, you just crash, right? And you get hungry, you need a snack in the middle of the morning.
Drop. Yes, yes.
Yeah, that drop doesn't feel good. The reason that I think if you back up a few more slides, this is overlaid with changing that. Yeah, right here.
You're talking about, yes, yes, yes.
Yeah,
This versus.
These slides here demonstrate the connection between that glycemic index, that high glycemic index food where you just eat the sugar and your blood sugar spikes up. During that time when your blood sugar is high, your body is creating fat because you have an excess of sugar. That demonstrates the vital importance of these complex carbohydrates, like I think 2 slides later, you had the brown rice or some example of,
yes.
yeah. So if brown rice or some other complex carbohydrate where you don't get that sugar spike, you're just taking care of your energy requirements rather than creating more fat. That concept was just key for me.
Yes.
I wanted to answer, Dr. Hillman, a few questions that came in via email. And so with your permission, I'm going to
yes, go ahead, please.
Finish your slide. I'm going to share some of these questions. Someone asked a question about the estrogen in soy products and could that be detrimental? And I've conferred with some of the other physicians, and the short answer is no. The longer answer is studies have shown that the phytoestrogens are actually healthy and prevent breast cancer.
Yes.
And in fact, the risk of estrogen is somewhat overblown, according to my dad, who's an OBGYN, but maybe he's biased, who knows? In any case, the short answer is no, you're fine. Just drink your soy milk, eat soy products, you'll be fine. It's not going to increase your risk of
and they actually will,
cancers.
Those phytoestrogens will actually attach to those estrogen receptor molecules without, and inhibit some of the effects, if there are any, that the estrogen will actually produce. So they actually showed in studies that there was a decrease, for example, risk of breast cancer with those who consumed soy than those who didn't. So
good. So the next question that came in is, what is the best plant-based milk? And I just answered the one you'll drink.
Yeah.
I think all of them are superior to dairy milk based on the amount of cholesterol and the amount of fat, especially in whole milk. It's horrible. But I did suggest that if you're working on weight loss, probably you're not going to be drinking coconut milk. Coconut milk tastes great, but probably not.
No.
Someone asked on almond versus soy milk, and again, it depends on why you're drinking the different milks. If you're wanting to get some protein, then probably soy milk is going to be superior to almond. If you just want something to go on your cereal, just look at the box and try to figure out, how many calories and how much sugar has been added. Again, that added sugar, there is some sugar added to these nut milks and these soy milks and things of that nature, and you want to be aware of that. Maybe Dr. Hillman, we could take a shopping tour at some point.
For sure, yeah. No,
So
you
the
can
next
even,
question was something about saturated fat. Is coconut okay for plant-based yogurt? And I said, sure, it's okay as part of a healthy diet. But if you're trying to lose weight, remember that yogurt, even, soy yogurt or vegan yogurt, it's a processed food. And you want to be, moving away to more just eating the plant itself. But coconut water is probably okay. I don't know. Do you know if there's any coconut
yeah, no, no,
water
no,
with
it's just
coconut?
electrolytes, and there is some sugar, but electrolytes mainly. There now, coconut water, you have to read the labels also, because if it's straight coconut water, it doesn't taste as good as the most sold coconut waters, which actually have added sugar in them. So you just have to read the labels again on that.
Yeah. I grew up in Puerto Rico. I drank water directly
Yes.
out of the coconuts.
Yeah.
It's not all that great. Just drink
Yep.
your tap water. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Chris Anderson. If someone could find him and pin him and unpin Dr. Hillman and I, and we'll have our spiritual component for the night.
All right, well, pinning is going on. Greetings, everyone. Good to see you all. And I hope you're having a good time in the program. Of course, there's some ups and downs. I've shared with you a number of topics. One of them I just want to remind you about, that sometimes we fall and make mistakes. The scriptures gives us clear guidance. The difference between those who continue on and those who don't is those who actually get back up again. But tonight I wanted to look at a little different topic. And it's one I think almost everyone intuitively agrees with, but for some reason, we don't all really believe it. And I'll show you what I mean here. I want to share with you a Bible passage. This is out of Luke chapter 22. And this is sharing about the end of Jesus' life. Right at the very end, he had a supper with his disciples. And then it says he went out to the Mount of Olives, as his custom was. I'm in verse 39 if you ever want to reference this. And his disciples came with him. When he came to the place, he said to them, "Pray that you may not enter into temptation." Now, Jesus, of all people, knew what it was like to face temptation, and he knew where the source of power was. It was in prayer. And as we come to God in prayer, seeking for help, he won't turn us away. He will actually give us the help that we need. Now, as we look at this story that unfolds here, there is an experience that Jesus goes through that gives us an insight into how we can find success in our life. And I just want to continue here. And Jesus was withdrawn from them about a stone's throw, and he knelt down and prayed. That's pretty powerful. Jesus tells the disciples, if you're going to face temptation, you need to pray. And he himself, who is going to go through the most difficult experience any being has ever faced, and he knelt down and he felt that he needed to pray. It was here. So in prayer is where we connect with the source of all strength, the source of our power, the one who loves us more than his own life. It's where we connect with God. Jesus knelt down and he prayed, and this is what he said: "Father, if it is your will, take this cup away from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done." In Jesus' prayer, he recognized that his own desires might betray him. The pressures he was going to face were going to be great, but he knew that his Father would never betray him. And so he prayed, "Lord, not my will, but yours be done." What this is called surrender. Jesus surrendered his choices, what he desired to God. And this is a secret of power, but it continues. "Then an angel appeared to him from heaven and strengthened him. And being in agony, he prayed more earnestly. Then his sweat became like great drops of blood falling to the ground." Now, this is a medical condition. He was in such stress, such mental turmoil, that his blood actually came through his pores, and it says fell in great drops of blood to the ground. This is extreme agony. Jesus, the sins of the world were being placed upon him, and he was bearing a burden that you and I will never face. But what was it that strengthened him? It was two things. One, he was seeking God in prayer, yes, but he was praying that not his will would be done, but God's. And he stayed there. He didn't get up and leave. He didn't get up and walk away. He stayed there. And that's this idea of staying there is called endurance. What is it that makes some people endure longer than others? I mean, there's some people, they run a mile, that's all they can do. Other people, they run an entire marathon. I used to think that was really impressive until I read about someone that ran a 100-mile race. And then I thought, well, that's severe endurance. And then I read about someone that ran 371 miles in like a 24-hour period. Scott Jurek is an ultra runner. He just ran for 24 hours. Can you imagine? Like for me running, like an hour, that's a long time, but 24 hours of solid running. And he's a fast runner. Endurance. What is it that makes some people endure longer than others? We're in a race in life. Hopefully when you joined this program, you weren't thinking of a sprint. You were thinking of more along the lines of a marathon. But there was this book I was reading not too long ago by a lady called Angela Duckworth. She wrote this book called Grit, which is the idea of endurance. And in there, she looked at the concept of what is the metric that helps people have success. And she relates this idea in the book about Americans' view of what gives people success. And Americans are asked which gives someone more success, their talent or effort. And if you were to guess which ones Americans said gave us greater success, what would you think? I mean, you're an American, right? I mean, most of you, I'm sure. Most Americans, two times the amount of Americans said it was effort. They said effort gives people more success than talent. They were also asked the same thing about athletic ability. And again, same thing. They said, if someone's going to be successful in sports, it's not going to be their natural talent. It's going to be effort that gives them success. So this is kind of what we say we believe, but they put this to the test in a little different way. The psychologists did this survey among musical experts and asked them, which will give someone more success, effortful training, or if they're naturally talented at this. And all of them said effortful training will help someone be more successful. So then what they did is they set up this test and they played a musical piece, and they told them, they didn't tell them the truth. They told them there's two separate pianists. One is naturally talented and had early evidence of talent. And the other is what they called a striver and had early evidence of high motivation and perseverance. And they played the two different musical clips. And they asked these professional musicians, who did they think was the better musician? And they all voted that it was the one who had natural talent. Now, they said it was the one who put in more effort. But what they really thought in their mind was it's the one that's more talented or gifted is the one that's going to be more successful. So I know we all recognize that going through the Best Way program is not easy. It's going to take persevering endurance and effort. We know that. But do we really believe that? Like when you're walking down the street, when you see someone, a picture of someone, you just think, well, it's just easy for them. It's just they're athletic or they have this naturally. I could never be like that. And so we believe in our minds it takes effort to get there, but we really don't down inside necessarily, and we get discouraged. So I want to give you a little bit of encouragement this evening that our prime example, Jesus, persevered in the most severe test that any being has ever faced. And he came off a victor because of two things: the power of God and his willingness to stay the course. Like God didn't force him. He was willing. Recently, I would say in this last year, my wife had this desire to fix a little gap beside her stove. She wanted me to put this countertop around it. We'd initially built the cabinets for a bigger stove, and then we decided we wanted a smaller stove. And so we had this gap around our stove, and it just bothered us. Macaroni would fall down in there and you had to reach in and kind of clean it out. She's like, Chris, I'm tired of this. Let's fix it. So I got some granite countertops, some little pieces and from the granite store. And I went to put it in, and they gave me this special compound mixture. And I had to mix one part of chemical with another. And they said, it's very, very strong. Do not get it on your hands. So I had gloves. I mixed it up. I put it down. I put the countertop on it. And that countertop is stuck. You cannot move it now. For that ingredient to work properly, we had to mix two things together. One ingredient by itself would not work. It took both. When they were mixed together, then they became much more powerful. That's what it was in Jesus' experience. God would not force him to go through with bearing our sin, but he couldn't do it in his own strength. He said that he could only do what his Father enabled him to do. And it took his willingness and the power of God, and then it became available to him. Now, Hebrews chapter 12 tells us about our experience. We just read about Jesus' experience, but I want to read to you what the Bible tells us about our experience and how we face things. It says, therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and the sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance, that's grit, the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him, that's you. Jesus thought you were the joy that was worth all of this. For the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. In your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood. This idea of grit and endurance isn't something we can do on our own. As we surrender our life to God, it is mixed with his power, and then he gives us the strength to carry on, to endure. So we are partway through this program. Tonight is week 5, and I just want to encourage you to hang strong, hold strong, endure to the end. God will be with you, and he will give you the delight of your heart. God bless.
Thank you so much, Chris Anderson, for that very powerful, encouraging spiritual word. I myself was really encouraged by it. And 2 takeaways I got from that. The 2 ingredients that you mentioned, indicative of God, Jesus did not trust his own desire. He thought his own desire would betray him, but he knew that God's will would not betray him. That's powerful. And also his willingness and endurance, his stick-it-to-itiveness, if you want to call it that. And that is what I like. And I think with that, we can move on through this program and endure to the end. Now, we're going to move on to one of I call my favorite part of the program. It has to do with food. So it's our culinary highlights, and that will be done by Rachel Detweiler.
Good evening, everyone. Let me share my screen with you here. And let's see if I can get it to go. Oh dear. All right. Well, let me have fun here for a second. There it goes. All right. Well, I hope everybody's been having fun cooking some of these recipes. This one, I cannot tell you, I was absolutely shocked when I started working with this one myself at how easy it was. I spent half the time peeling a few things, and that was it. It was just throw it together and done. And I was just really impressed at how yummy it tasted and how easy it was. So that being said, let me share it here with you. This is it looks like a lot of ingredients, but 4 of them are spices and 1 of them is vegetable bouillon. What you see in the middle is quinoa. I don't know if any of you have tried that. It's a very small grain, and a lot of people have probably had it by now, but you can buy it dried and you can also buy it prepackaged, ready to go. But obviously dried is the way that it's probably best. This happens to be a tricolor one, but you can find it very inexpensively, even at Costco in huge bags with just the white colored one. This also requires black beans, and you see some sweet potatoes there, or yams, whichever one they are. And you can use any vegetables you want in here. If you want to use butternut squash, you could use that. You can buy that prepackaged, already cut up or even frozen, and that would work in place of the sweet potatoes if you even have less time than I did. One of the ingredients I did forget in the picture was, and you'll see this in the other pictures, is corn. I added 1 cup of corn to this recipe as well. If chili powder is bothersome to your digestive system, you can use coriander instead. So keep that in mind. And you could also add other spices like onion powder and garlic powder if you wanted more of those as well. But give it a shot this way if you can. And also another vegetable you could use instead of butternut squash or sweet potatoes is like maybe zucchini. That's something else that you don't have to peel and cuts up really quickly and easily. So then this is really simple. I went ahead, even though the quinoa had been rinsed and cleaned, quinoa develops a soapy substance called saponin, and it's really disgusting in food. It makes it taste really bitter. So even if it says that it's been washed and rinsed triple time, I still rinse it and you'll still find that it bubbles up some. So highly recommend rinsing it. This is just a fine mesh sieve. It keeps it from escaping when you're rinsing it. And I just rinse it very well. And then as you can see, I just peeled and diced sweet potatoes. It took me about 5 minutes to peel and dice those. And you want them fairly small, not big chunks, because we're going to throw this in the oven, and you want it to cook quickly or cook thoroughly. So literally everything gets dumped into this 9x13 pan. And it looks kind of gross when you take a picture of it, but the black beans are in there, and I had rinsed those as well. And the quinoa, you can't see it because it all sunk to the bottom. It will begin to absorb the moisture from the broth, the vegetable broth and water that you put in it. And you can even leave it to overnight and stick it in your refrigerator. It'll soak up the broth, and then it would even decrease your cooking time if you wanted to do that. But this is pretty easy to throw together. So if you want it for a meal right away, it's not a big deal either. You do bake this. You can see the quinoa came up underneath. And all the sweet potatoes were baked very well. All you have to do is bake it at 350 for about 45 minutes covered with tin foil or a pan on top of it. And then remove the tin foil for about 15 minutes, and then more of the water will absorb, and then you take it out and let it sit for about 5 minutes, and you have a delicious meal. And all you need to do is stir it up, and I topped it with some green onions. You could add salsa to this. It's really good in a bowl just like this. You could add a salad with it, or salad toppings to it. And my family, we ended up putting it in tortillas and eating it as burritos, and it was just lovely. We enjoyed it very much. So I hope that you can try this recipe. It's, again, very simple, no more than 10 minutes. So other than the cooking time. Thank you. That's all I have tonight.
Thank you so much, Rachel. You make the a plant-based cooking look so easy, simple and healthy. I want to thank you very much for that. I'm learning some stuff here myself. At the end of this program, I might become a very, very good cook and impress my wife somehow. As we move along on our program, we are, by way of announcement, uh, remember that our times will change next week from 7 o'clock to 7:30. So we're moving a half an hour down, and our walking is changing to online socials on Thursdays at 10:30 a.m. and on Mondays at 5:30 p.m. We can join on Zoom or on the Facebook group. And I'm going to ask Lucas to just explain this help button thing here.
First, about the online socials, I just want to add that is new. Previously, it was just on the Facebook group. We did hear that some of you who don't have Facebook accounts would like to join. So we will be using the same Zoom link that we currently use for Best Way. So you can just click the same link in the email that you got earlier this week, and that will allow you to join in on those socials. It's a good time for encouragement, discussion, more interaction than you might normally get there.